Hey guys, David Pingree here today with you at Racer X Online. We got our first ride today on the 2020 Husqvarna FC 350. This is a cool bike. If you've not ever tried one, you should do yourself a favor and borrow a buddy's, or try to go to one of their ride days where they let you get on one of these. But really fun bike, bridges that gap between a 250, which can be a little too soft for some bigger riders or more aggressive riders, and a 450, which can be a handful for a lot of people. So neat bike. The changes for 2020 are pretty minor, but there's a couple of things that make a big difference. Last year, there was a lot of complaints, kind of model across the whole model range for Husqvarna. There was a mid-stroke harshness in the suspension. So with this WP Exact suspension now, they basically went to completely different valving. All of the spring rates on the shock are the same for the 250, 350, and 450. 4.2, which is much softer. It started at a 4.8 a couple years back, so they've come way down on the spring rate, but got kind of their own valving setup. And so what this allows them to do, one, it gets rid of that mid-stroke harshness, so it's a much more plush, supple feel to it. And if you don't give it some time and don't work the setup right, you can mistake that for being like soft and mushy. I've heard some other people say, oh, it's a good bike for a vet rider or somebody that's slow or beginner. That's not accurate at all, because basically what this allows you to do, because it's an air fork, you can change your spring rate by just adding air or removing air. So if it's too soft, bump up the spring rate. If you are a heavier guy, I would say 185 plus, you probably do want to go to a stiffer rear shock spring. But the valving that's in here will work. Whether you've got a 4.2 or a 4.8, it'll still work great. The valving setup is nice. You just need to adjust the spring rate for your weight. Set the sag at 105, and then just sort of adjust to what you like. For me, once I bumped up two bar in the fork, or 0.2 bar, and that gave me, it was like a half a spring rate basically firmer from what they recommend stock, which is 10.4 bar. And so what that did was just hold the fork up a little bit higher in the stroke, like a half a spring rate, like I said, and then I went 2 clicks stiffer on the high speed on the shock. And so that kind of gave me a nice balance where it stayed up a little bit firmer. And then the only other issue I was having was when I would get into a deep bump or land hard off something and go through the stroke, the front end had a tendency to pop back up on me. So I went 2 clicks slower on the rebound and completely fixed it. So with those minor changes, me at 175 was able to get this thing just perfect. I had no issues. I could charge, have fun. Yeah, really good setup. So with the suspension, don't be fooled into thinking, oh, it's way too soft. It's very easy to adjust. If you can't get it with the low speed back here and a little bit less sag, it's still too soft. It's just a spring rate change on the back, and you can adjust the fork with air, very simply. So I think that the changes they've made are really positive. It doesn't have that mid-stroke harsh feeling anymore. It's nice and plush, and I think the vast majority of riders are going to like that. Again, you just need to get the air pressure in the fork right and the spring rate right. If you are a heavier guy, you'll need to probably adjust that spring rate in the back. Okay, so past the suspension, I got it handling great. The motor's, kind of the standard of what it's been. The only thing that changed internally was a gear that they just beefed up, and it was just for reliability reasons. There wasn't any issues with it, but it doesn't really change performance at all. The only thing that is performance driven is this bike now comes with a vented left side plate. It comes with both, so you've got the solid one. If you're at a sand track or a mud race, lots of rain, water crossings, you can throw the solid one on. Otherwise, last year, a common thing people were doing was drilling holes in the side cover to give it more air. It's a noticeable difference. So now they've just, it comes with both panels. You can throw on the vented one. It looks really trick and works well, obviously. All the race teams were doing that last year over at Husqvarna. Other than that, everything is kind of the same as it was. If you liked last year's bike, the feel of it, you're going to like this one the same. It felt like a 250 to me, really. That's the one thing about this that you have to remember. You can't ride it like a 450. The lack of torque doesn't really allow you to do that. If you're super light, 140 or something like that, maybe you can get away with it, but you have to rev it a little bit like a 250. So if you remember to ride it that way and know that this thing revs to the moon, you'll be pleasantly surprised. There are the maps too. I like the more aggressive map with this. I like to keep the traction control on. That's just my personal preference. You got to run through those. But all in all, amazing bike. One other suggestion I would make, get the short throw throttle cam. and cut these bars a little bit. Something we've addressed in the past is these bars are very low and very straight and flat. And because they're all cut from the same length of tubing, the less amount of sweep and rise they have to them, the longer they're going to be. So I personally take a 1/2 inch off either side, and it brings it down to a much more manageable feel, less head shake, and just a lot better feeling for me. So if you're a big tall guy, you might not like that. You might like these wide bars, but I would say if you're willing to give it a try, I think you'll like it. So we'll get into more of that setup stuff in the dialed in. For now, really liking the look of this bike, the way it feels, the setup, the changes they made to the suspension are good. So nice job, Husqvarna. I'm stoked on it. Excited to get more time on our FC 350 in 2020. We'll see you guys on the dialed in video.